And we also have you all muted. So if you do want to talk on the phone to us, you can chat in the chat box and let us know that you'd like to be unmuted if you have a question you want to explain. Otherwise, we encourage you to put your questions in the chat box, make comments in the chat box. So sounds like people can hear us okay, and right now working. Thanks for all those comments, appreciate it. So Anu is here to join us, and Anu, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Sure. And then kick off with your presentation. We're so excited about this. Anu's done this presentation before, so some of you may have heard an earlier version. We've had the recording up on the website, but we always learn something new, and it always changes, and there's so many great tips from somebody who's really been in the trenches reviewing grants and can give us some tips and knows Cornell Cooperative Extension so well. So thanks for being here.
Great, my pleasure. So I do want to sort of make a call out that I have done this presentation before, and so for some of you who may be joining a second time, bravo, you're a glutton for punishment. But for those of you who haven't, I'm really glad that you're taking the time to think about this, because I think a lot about grant writing. And so what I'm hoping to do today is just share with you, share comments that I have learned from other educators about grant writing and what's worked and what hasn't. And then I will share with you what I've learned as being a reviewer of grants. And sitting in the room with the people that review grants, you learn a lot about human behavior. So I'll share what I've learned about that. I want to go through outcomes, funding, and evaluation. That dominates the funding platforms right now. Almost every competitive grant is using this structure. So I want to talk about that and make sure you know where to find information related to it if you're not familiar with it. I will also outline some strategies that I think are really important for building effective collaborations. And I've talked about this in different venues, and it's really hard because often we're being driven by grant deadlines to make collaborations, and that's the least attractive way to get to know somebody. So, and then I'm going to share some comments that have come up in the past about recommendations for CCE administration, and we luckily have some of those people in the room. So, but we will be asking you for information and input as we go that we'll be collecting and being able to share with others here on campus. So I wanted to make sure that if all of you can hear me okay and that this volume is okay. If you cannot, just indicate that in the chat box. So I wanted to add, the first question I have for you is really wanting to know if you have previously attended a grant writing workshop. How many of you are newbies to this? And if you have attended one, I would love to hear which ones you've attended. So if you do say yes, please do go ahead and add the name of the workshop you attended in the chat box. So I see that some have, yeah, I'm still waiting for more people are responding. It's looking pretty split as far as so far. Mm-hmm. So some of the types of sessions people have attended, Matt LaRue has been to a SARE Research and Education Grant Proposal Workshop. New York Farm Viability certainly hosts these a lot, and if you haven't done one, you should definitely do theirs. They have an outcomes funding-based proposal as well as SARE. All right, it looks like it's a split, and many of you have, it's about a split between those who have and haven't. So do keep adding names of the different kinds of trainings you've done in the past, please. This will be helpful to your colleagues. So I have one more question to ask you, a couple of more actually. So we're going to go ahead and, I can't advance. Oh. Great. So the next question is, I want to know how many grant proposals that have you, and I'm saying more than $1,000. I think that that I know that some people are writing sort of fairly small grants to local organizations, but how many did you lead or collaborate on in 2015? And you have a choice of like from 1 to 4 or 5. So I want to just get a sense of how active you've all been in grant writing.
And if you haven't guessed, this is a participatory webinar. So chime in. We're tracking the non-answers. We don't know who you are individually.
So again, there are a few of you that are real grant writing animals that have done more than 4. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, great.
I see that another workshop that was offered was by Neil Schwartzbach?
Yes.
And when was that?
That was last year, and it was done regionally. So I think he was in 4 or 5
Great.
regions around the state and did a day long.
And is that recorded anywhere?
It was live, so
it was live, so no recording. Okay. So it looks like we have a few of you that are new to this, but almost everyone has some experience. So I think that the comments that I'm going to be sharing with you going forward are probably going to resonate for some of you who have been putting these grants in, but the next question is, how many were funded? That's really the bottom line. We know these take a lot of work and a lot of energy, so please give us a sense of how successful you've been. Boy, I see the 0 and 1 columns going up pretty fast.
That's right.
Grant writing is not an easy game.
There is a greater than 4.
Bravo. Excellent. So thank you for those responses. I am hoping that as we progress today, that you're going to get a few comments and some tips on how to hopefully improve your strategy as well as some of the content of the grant proposals you're putting forward, and hopefully simplify some of the work that you have in doing grant proposals. So this is just a brief overview of, in the past when I've done this presentation to educators, I've asked them repeatedly, where are they getting funding from? And there is such a broad cross-section of organizations that all of you are actually actively soliciting funds from. Some of those are the federal grants, and that is the place that I am the most familiar, is in working to get federal dollars. But there's also private nonprofits like the New York Farm Viability Institute, as well as other local nonprofits. Many of you are getting funding through local groups. At a state level, depending on your area of work and your mission area, the Department of Health or Social Services, Department of Environmental Conservation, these could be groups that are you're writing grants to. The Specialty Crops Research Initiative, if you work directly with specialty crops that do ag and markets, and so I know a bunch of you have led proposals that go to them. I think one of the interesting and sort of more difficult to sort of assess groups is working with foundations. And I was really surprised to learn that some educators are working and getting funding through Walmart, through Toyota, through Coca-Cola, through corporate foundations that I hadn't actually considered to be active in the agriculture and food and human well-being space in the work that we do, but they are. 4-H, United Way, and then I know just from my recent work, the Local Economies Project is supporting a lot of work in the Hudson Valley as well now as a private, as a foundation. So I just wanted you to be aware of that because sometimes we get a bit insular in thinking about where and how we look for money, and you would be surprised where you can find mission alignment sometimes outside of your area. So I would really encourage you to take the time to be talking to your colleagues who work in different areas about where they're getting their funding and where they've been successful, because new collaborations will start with those conversations. So I'm going to move on now to what I'm going to cover. And so I want to just actually work through a little bit and about different parts of a grant proposal. And I think you know this, that there's several sections. Almost all of them ask for these sections. We almost always ask for a justification, your methods, how you're going to do the work, who's in charge, who reports to who, the management plan, your budget, and how are you going to spend those few dollars in a wise way. Support letters and documentation, and then a logic model, and then the literature that supports it. These are the common sections of most grant proposals. Some of them emphasize some sections more than others, and that you'll have to understand by really deeply connecting with the program manager of the project, of the organization you're going to. So what I didn't say here, but what I'm going to say in this next, I want to tell you about in the next slide is what I think is the actual order of writing a grant proposal. It has nothing to do with the sections you have to review. And I think people get stuck writing it in the order of what's required, and that's a waste of your time. That's not using your time the best way. I think that I hate logic models, but they are a tool, so we'll talk about them.
You can't say that.
I know, I'm not supposed to say that. I love living illogically, but I just really think that the more visual and the more sketchy that you can get your ideas down on paper very quickly, the better. And so I would say actually a step that I forgot that should be the very top of this is connect with the program officer. So connect with the funder and talk to them about your idea. That should be in many ways your first order of business, especially if it's someone you've not worked with before. They love to hear from all of you, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it. There's a lot of well-intentioned people that are employed by foundations that are eager to tell you how to get their money.
Nice.
And they're waiting for the phone to ring, so pick it up and call them, that first thing. I think starting with a logic model is really important to really get a sense of what is the outcome you want. We'll talk about that more, and who are the key players and the key strategies you're going to use to do that. And then I go straight to support letters. What's going to sell this idea? Once you've actually got some people in place that you're collaborating with, this takes the longest to get together. To getting letters of support from community members, if you wait till the end where you usually put them in the proposal, forget it. You're not going to get the letters you need to sell your grant. And then I tend to focus in on the approach and methods and the management plan. They sort of develop together. And the budget to do the work. Of course, that's going to change your management plan and approach if you are thinking about a project that really would take $150,000, but you only have $25,000 to ask for. It doesn't hurt to be able to say in a proposal that this is the grand vision and this is the full scope of work, but we recognize that this funding is limited and this is what we're asking for. Any funder wants to know they're part of a bigger picture. And being realistic will increase your chances of being funded. People promise more than they can deliver, and that is most definitely, I think, is a disservice you do to yourself. So if you're realistic and you represent that realism in the proposal, and put it in the context of this larger vision, it will strengthen the proposal and your ability to get what you need to do the work you've outlined. And then at the very end, I write the introduction and the justification. You already know why you have to do it. So do that last, because that's the part that's going to be, when you're totally burnt out on the process, you'll be able to spit this out easy. Don't get hung up on writing it's got to be nice and tight and clean, and you're going to be able to do that in the best way at the very end. So again, connect yourself from the order of most proposals, which is introduction, methods, blah, 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 to the actual functional building of a team and building of a project. So one question I have for those of you who are new is, like, do you have any terms from requests for applications or RFPs that you feel you need defined or clarified? You can just put those in the chat box. Sometimes people wrestle with some of this, and so if there's any words that you feel that you've not understood in an RFP that you've worked with lately, just go ahead and put it in the chat box and we'll try to address those as we go. And I'm going to just wait a couple of seconds in case someone has something. So I haven't seen anything, so we will move on. And if anything comes up, we've had others in the past that have questions that have come up. So if you do think of something as we move along, just go ahead and put it in there. And just preface it with clarify, please. So in thinking about a review process, I've been on a whole diversity of review panels. I've hosted a grant program through the Small Farms program, and we had small grants we offered to educators. And so we had about 5 or 6 reviewers that would review typically 20 proposals and rank them for funding. And I've been on USDA proposals where we were allocating $20 to $30 million, and the proposals could have been up to $2 million each. And there you're working with a grant review committee that's about 20 professionals or more. And the way that they handle that, if you've not done it, and I am going to encourage all of you to try to serve on a review panel. I think it's one of the most undersold and rewarding professional development experiences that I've ever had myself personally. It totally changed the way I approached grant writing. And particularly because you get to hear from your colleagues all their tricks, or you also begin to understand how all the, can I swear online? All the BS that you put in the proposal, they see right through it. So don't try to wow people with your writing because they see through it. I've been in so many of these review panels where we read something and like, okay, that's total crap. There's no way they can do it. This is what is said. So the more clear you are, the more direct, and the more that you speak to the uncertainties, the unknowns, and the assumptions, the better, because you won't aggravate the reviewer. So that's the problem, is that if you have a proposal that goes into a review panel and only 3 or 4 people of the 20 are looking at it, if you piss one of them off, you're not going to get funded. Because what ends up happening is that for every proposal, one individual is called the lead, and then there's a secondary reader, a tertiary reader, and the 4th reader. And so those 4 people present the proposal to the larger committee, and the first person, the primary reader, is the one who basically lays out the attributes, the positive and negative attributes of the grant. You have no idea who that is. So you don't know what their background is, and you have to remember that they may not know everything you know in this area of work. I served on a proposal review panel for USDA on local foods. And, you know, there were some people there that were urban agriculture specialists, there were some farmers, there were people that were policymakers, really different. And so if you're to write a proposal that comes in on using high tunnels to extend the season for local foods, and you make an assumption that people know what a high tunnel is, you may end up getting dinged because people don't understand what you're talking about. So you have to assume that the people reviewing it only have a moderate amount of knowledge in your area. So that means defining your terms and not using too much jargon. And jargon is irritating. I'll tell you that right now. It doesn't make you sound smarter. It just makes other people have to work harder to understand you, and that's aggravating a reviewer. So be really clear, be concise. If a proposal is allowed 10 pages, don't go right up to the last line. If you went to 9.5, a reviewer will say, wow, it was so great. They were so short. It doesn't even matter if it's a half a page. It's a psychological thing. But it's keeping it tight and keeping it crisp. Often you can just say, this was described earlier. You don't have to say it over again. But to be very, again, I can't overemphasize the need to not aggravate the people that will be reviewing the proposal. Providing specific measurable outcomes, particularly in an outcome funding model, really critical. And also follow the request for applications to the letter. If they say no more than 6 pages for an introduction, if you go 1 sentence over, the reviewers will bring it up. I cannot believe what they bring up. They had too many letters of support attached. It actually, as soon as someone says something negative in the room, it affects the success of the proposal. So It's a little bit of a game, but it's also about being deeply respectful for the people who are trying to do this and make good decisions. So here are some of the kinds of things that I have heard, and maybe those of you who have been on review panels have also heard, that have come from in conversations, common criticisms. And these are ones just to keep these in mind as you're writing. In the content, unlikely to have an impact, insufficient justification, poorly written, vague, or unfocused, not addressing the priorities. Timelines are not presented, a poor review of other projects. This is actually a really big one. If you're applying to an agency, you have to look at what they funded in the past. You don't want to go in with the same proposal. You have to reference past funding by that agency in the justification and as to why they should support you as well. So usually it's insufficient review of projects funded by that agency would be the way I would add emphasis. Proposed activities not tightly linked with the budget. So I've been on a panel where there was the whole project was focused on sort of supporting a particular production practice. Now when you look at the budget, they've asked for a trailer and they've asked for a whole bunch of computers, and you're like, what the hell? This is not about that particular ag development and that ag in the investment in that particular type of production system. There was no mention of a trailer and needing a trailer in the grant. The proposal wasn't funded because the budget was misaligned. Because as soon as there's a loss of trust, then people don't believe the rest of what the proposal says. And it's enough to move you down in the ranking to where you won't get funded. So tightly link the budget and the proposed activities. And another problem is if you had submitted previously to a project and you did not get funded and you didn't respond to the criticism and the comments, then people will note that. Moving on to some of the common criticisms related to the leadership. The people do look at those CVs. You'll be surprised. I also thought they never did, but they do. They want to know that that person has leadership experience, and so you want to demonstrate that. And you may even have a separate CV that's for grant writing. You know, it's only a lot of the federal grants ask for a 2-page CV. Don't give them the one that you would use just in general to get a job. Write one that a short one that you can use for a long time that emphasizes your leadership and your grant facilities and your ability to do that kind of work. The proposal might lack letters of support. This is a big one, and sometimes it's hard to tell where to put the letters of support. I don't know if you've written USDA grants, any of you, but sometimes it's really hard to know, and it's a little tricky because if it doesn't explicitly say attach letters of support, yet you know it's going to strengthen your proposal, where do you put it in the application? So be very careful with that, because sometimes they will not include them in the review package if they were not requested. Also, leadership issues. If you have no prior experience serving the audience, you have to make the case for why you should be the leader. And other materials that don't. And there's no other supporting evidence of experience.
So I know if you had a situation like that, would you recommend that somebody to call in to the funding agency to ask that question? I have some letters of support that I can include. It's going to strengthen. I think it will strengthen my proposal. Where should I put them?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's not obviously clear, ask the panel manager or ask the program manager for sure. I'm not able to. Okay. Great. I'm going to move fairly quickly through these next ones. I think they're pretty good summaries here, but again, they're for you to just think about. Sometimes a proposal will ask you to attach a logic model. If it's not there, reviewers notice, because it's the cheat sheet. The logic model ends up being the cheat sheet for being able to focus in on what the project is going to do, especially if your writing's not that great and it's confusing in the text. And that happens. Some of us get so focused in, and we get so narrow in our vision because we're so busy writing that the logic model helps add that perspective. And other common criticisms like the work can't be completed in time, or the management plan isn't really clear, or that there's no clear target audience, and also that audience was not in any way engaged in writing the proposal. And I think for most of you, this is probably going to be a really critical one, is how do you provide evidence that your audience was engaged in developing the ideas. So an important part of writing the justification is to talk about how you engaged your audience. And then budget ones, again, not that uncommon, and probably ones that you're familiar with and think about when you're writing budgets, but the matching, so some grants are asking for matching funds now, and they're a pain in the butt. They're really, really hard. It's really hard to come up with good matching sources of funding. Very few of us have a little pot of money that we can use to provide match, so we have to look elsewhere. And then when we're trying to do that matching, we sometimes say, for me, I work with farmers. I try to create some way of estimating what the land on a particular farm is worth and their labor is worth, to come up with some number that shows how they're going to contribute, you know, not financially, but through time and through facilities to the grant activity. It's really hard. And don't underestimate the time it's going to take to outline what that is and to develop it. Because then you have to track on it and report it, and that's the worst part. Hopefully you have somebody in your office who can do that for you and help you think about it, because it's really, for many of these proposals, and, you know, a 50% match is not out of the ordinary, and we're seeing more and more of those.
So there's not a standard value?
There's no, I think certainly, no. I think it depends on where you are. The values in some parts of the state are different than others, and so it has to be realistic, but it has to be clear how you do it. Beginning Farmer and Rancher program has had matching in the past. We've been really working hard to make sure they don't continue to ask for matching. They still do have a 25% match. Again, this is a grant opportunity that many of our educators are looking at or have applied for or been successful in, that requires matching. So, capital expenditures, almost all proposals hate giving you money for hard goods. So computers, equipment, if you're going to ask for it, you have to justify it like crazy. If more than 70% of the budget goes to one institution, it draws into question if it's really collaborative. So some groups want a collaborative project, or you say this is a multidisciplinary approach. Well, if you get all the money, where's the multidisciplinary in that? Insufficient time commitments for leadership and management. I would encourage you all to figure out a way to charge your own time if you're not doing that. Or even charging time, if you don't have, here we go, an indirect cost rate that's approved by the agency that you're going to, you need to build an administrative cost and fees. You can put that in the other line of most proposals, but know what that is and make sure you have the money committed to pay for the person's time who's going to help you administer this project. And then another common problem is a lot of proposals ask for what your current or pending funding is, and if there's another project that you already have that sounds a hell of a lot like the one you're asking for, it can ding you. And then there's all of the stuff that makes us crazy. It's the missing forms, or they're not in a PDF. For grants.gov, if any of you've worked with that, it's just this horrible machine. Don't wait till the last minute if you're doing a federal grant. Please don't wait. Because last year, I know a group of colleagues who hit the submit button, and then so many people were submitting that they didn't get the confirmation that it went through until 5:01, and at 5 o'clock, the system shut down. Do not wait till the last minute. I know actually 2 or 3 different groups where this happened to them. Do it in advance, and then make sure everything's there by calling the program manager. So always check what's, most of the time the proposals will give you a short list, always check it. So at this point, I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions from what I've gone over so far related to common proposal criticisms.
There was a question that came in a little bit earlier that went to all attendees, and I just saw a response from Sarah that Sarah was saying, I think the RFA is a request for application.
Yes.
Somebody must have asked that question. So
yep.
If you do want to make sure you're getting your questions to the host, or just send to all participants or host. So
Great.
RFA is request for application.
So if we don't have any questions, then I'll just keep moving right on.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And just wondering about, you talked a little bit about indirects and how if indirects are not allowed, you can build that into, you know, the other part of, the budget. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that might be reviewed by a panel, or if you've been successful in doing that? I think that's a question for.
It's actually, I don't think people flinch at that. I haven't been on any panels where, as long as it's not unreasonable. Like you can, so a common way to do it is under other direct cost administrative fees. So I've had a grant with a collaborating organization that was a nonprofit that had a fiscal sponsor. That fiscal sponsor charged 7% to manage the grant. And so they simply put it in there as an administrative fee. That was an indirect cost.
Okay.
And so as long as it's clearly articulated and described, it's not a problem. I've not seen it a problem. And you don't want it, of course, you don't want the administrative cost to be 20% of the total project budget. It's got to be 10% or less. That's, I think that's kind of a line around just if you put it in as a separate line of a direct cost, be cautious about what that is. With indirect costs, you can get a much higher percent because then you're not just paying for fees or for individuals' labor. So there's two ways to do the administrative cost. You can put it into the salary line and say you have a bookkeeper or someone that's going to be project manager, you know, to do the fiscal management. You can put in labor hours there to quantify how they are supporting the grant. Or you can do a lump sort of administrative fee. We've also done this when we've had projects that are a cooperative extension office hosts for us, and we build in a fee for their bookkeeper to actually manage the funds. So that's how I would approach it. But I do encourage you all to really, when you're not writing a proposal, is the time to figure out the indirect cost issue. Not when you're in the middle of writing one. So if you anticipate in the next year that you're going to write a proposal to USDA, start working on the IDC rate now if your office doesn't have one. I know a few offices do, and so you have to check that first and get to know it. And the allowable indirects will vary by organization. So farm viability allows 18% now. Other projects only allow 10. Some USDA grants allow 56%. Some only allow 22%, which looks like 28% of direct cost. So you have to know what the agency will allow and then how to be approved to do that. You cannot just put it in a budget as IDC and take the max. For many organizations, you have to be approved or have proof for that cost being included. So this is the conversation that you need to work with your finance folks to work through and try to get it done, and it's a pain. I was working with one organization trying to get them an IDC rate, and they had been approved through one part of USDA, and you can use that letter supposedly to get IDC approved in another part, but you have to stay on it. You can't let it fall. You have to keep after the agency representatives to review your application.
And IDC is indirect cost.
Indirect cost.
And this may relate a little bit to another question that came in that was asking about so many proposals seem to have the same questions, so you see them over and over. Is there, do you have advice on answering that?
So I think I'm going to need more clarity. So sometimes a proposal, certainly I think it can sound like they're asking for the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. And this is the place where it's a great time to ask the program manager, what are you really asking us for here? Because sometimes they'll say, give us the background and the justification for the work, and then there may be, what is the rationale? There's different words that people are using for the same thing. I'm trying to think about where I've had this problem. Oh, sometimes when the people are saying, give us a sense of what the impacts are of a project. Well, that's also part of the justification. And so it can feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again. If you are able to in any way put numbers or estimated actual, if there's quantitative, any way you can add something quantitative to the way you describe impact, I think that will help strengthen the proposal. But again, I would go back definitely to the project manager, the grant program manager, and ask that question.
Okay, and that helps. The response says, what I thought the question was, actually different proposals had this similar question. So I was thinking, as you're preparing to search for grants, you have the indirect costs figured out. You also may have an introductory section that you can edit. And
I think if you write one grant and you work hard on it, you should send it as many places as you can. And you'll pitch it differently, and that's about knowing the organization. So, if you have other questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll just keep on moving. So the next topic I wanted to go into a little bit was outcomes-based funding. And so this is not so new anymore. It's actually, I feel like it's sort of standard practice, but it still throws people for a loop when they're forced to write an outcomes-based proposal, because we're not always used to describing our work in these terms. So, for example, the people that are doing this and looking for outcomes, using an outcomes-based approach, are typically these funders that really want to see something measurable. They want a specific, measurable, improved condition as a result of their investment. So they want to know that, it's almost like they have a return on investment attitude. They want to know directly what is it that this investment is going to do, and what's it going to turn into. What are the results going to be on a numbers basis often? So outcomes-based, they want to know, how many less people are going to be food insecure, how many people are going to eat, how many more servings of vegetables per day are they going to consume, how much less fertilizer are they going to apply. They want to know a specific improved condition as a result of this investment. And I think actually outcomes-based funding is an excellent match for cooperative extension. I think it's a natural, once you get past the jargon, which is all over outcomes-based funding, it really is about the work that you all do. It's about making change in communities on a personal level and working with groups of people to improve their own livelihoods and their quality of life. So turning what you already do into a fundable project, that's the trick. And it's about being able to structure a description of what you do, which is sort of the budget, the whole proposal I went through, but then to be able to take on some of these terms to describe what you do. So I've got deeply embedded in doing outcomes-based funding because I've led in the past, I led the New York State SARE professional development program. And so what that is that every Northeast SARE, if you don't know, is a Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. It's a USDA program. There's several different types of grants they offer. And they are funding, they have grants that are for research and education, they have grants that are just for people like yourselves, they're smaller, but to do certain projects, directed projects with any of your clients. They have grants that are direct to farmers. And they have this other piece that's this professional development network. Each state in the Northeast has, well, each state in the country actually has a representative. And that person is tasked with trying to sort of lift up the work in sustainable agriculture and food systems. So it was in the process of being involved with that I got really dragged into outcomes funding. And so I want to share with you many of the resources that I got from them that I thought were really helpful. And so some of these we posted on the page with the webinar. And so you'll see them there. And you'll have to excuse me now because I did a little bit of editing on a document that was for the state programs for SARE, and it targets farmers, but just substitute, you know, client for every time you see the word farmer, and it's still relevant, okay? So this isn't just for agriculture-based projects, it's for any type of an outcomes-based funding approach. So in doing outcomes-based funding, your key is to match your program and the mission with the goals of the right funders. And your success is based upon articulating a performance target or a specific outcome. That's where you're going to lay out a predicted change. And then all of the steps you're going to take to get there, the ways you're going to measure your progress towards that performance target. And those are your milestones. So the part that's hard, well, let me just ask you, who here feels really comfortable with outcomes-based funding? It's a poll.
You want the poll?
Yes, so let me see, we're setting up a poll right now because I think that you would be surprised how many experts we have in the audience already. So I want to actually...
I'm never surprised by that.
Yes, and I continue to learn and how to do this work, but it's really great to know who else is doing work or is familiar with this.
And then you'll probably want to take names later.
Well, I think that all of you should have the names of people that are really very comfortable with this. Just at least 5 of you that have said that you're very comfortable doing outcomes-based funding. We would like you to self-identify. I think that, you know, as a colleague network group here, it's really helpful to understand what our resources are. So a few of you who haven't answered yet, and there's only a few that have no idea what this concept is, and so hopefully you'll have enough to make you dangerous, but we're probably not going to be able to get enough. You at least be directed to some resources to help you deepen your understanding of it.
Let me know when you want to close the poll. I can show results.
Yeah, let's take a look at the results. Great.
That's pretty good with the number we have on. Some are still responding. 15%.
So we're just starting to close this to get a sense of who is it that, how many of you have actually done outcomes funding or feel really comfortable with it?
Do you want them to share names in the chat box?
Yes, please. If you can please share your names if you feel pretty comfortable with outcomes funding. I myself do a lot of coaching on these types of proposals. I think that anytime there's a rush, I probably get 3 or 4 requests that people send me their proposals and ask me to give comment. And since I've done the reviewing, I'm really happy to be brutal. And it's better to have that happen now before you get down the road and you put your heart and soul into something and it's not going to sell because of the way you've used your language.
So you're happy to be brutal before the proposal.
Before it goes in. Yep, definitely. So we have 6 individuals that feel very comfortable. I would really appreciate it if you share your names in the chat box. We have Arlene Wilson. Okay, there's some forms that I think, are these internal forms?
I've got a question there. So I'm able to see the polls on the mobile device.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Jen.
Excellent. So we have a few folks, and we're going to put your names in there. So if you're moderately comfortable, again, we ask that you all be willing to continue to be supportive of each other, because all of us have to learn how to do this work. There's a question here, and I don't understand the question. Can you discuss Form Code 602 and the available use of fringe benefits in grant applications by CCE associations?
So Doug is asking about Form Code 6002, which is on the website. I don't think the 3 of us here have worked very closely with that, so Doug, we can follow up with you on the fringe benefits. So that's the policy on fringe benefits in the grant application.
So Doug, definitely loop back to Tim and Celeste, and we'll get you an answer. And Robin Simmons managed an outcomes-based funding to develop volunteer training programs at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. That's awesome. So I invite any of you who have done this and have nuggets of wisdom to share or other tools to share that you feel are really helpful in doing an outcomes-based grant, please put them in the chat box because you are our collective wisdom. So a performance target, the key components are defining the who, which is your target audience, the action, like how they react to a particular intervention. And so you use action words like they, we can say farmers will know or be able to or think or believe or will plan to. Like these are the actions that they will do. The what incorporate reduced tillage in their management plan, and the why to improve soil health and increase water capture. Like that's the detail of a performance target. The who, the action, the what, and the why. And so these components are and it's not that hard to do when you realize that a performance target is basically positioning the proposal and the outcome of the proposal in the terms of the individuals and behaviors and actions that you want to see changed. So it's not enough to say that the goal of this proposal is to increase the understanding of soil health. That's great, but who cares? I mean, for a person that's using an outcomes-based approach, they want to see who you're going to target, how you're going to know you're successful, what is it that person will do, and why it's important. And so not only is the performance target all of this, you put numbers on that. That 35 farmers will implement reduced tillage practices on 20% of their land within 5 years of this project to conserve soil and increase water capture. Like then you're actually getting to something that might be of interest to the funder. So the performance target is the organizing part of the proposal. It's the place. And so here's an example of one of these outcomes. Oh, so here's a different one. 24 farmers will adopt at least 2 of the 4 demonstrated biocontrol strategies in at least 1 high tunnel and reduce pesticide applications by 50% with no loss of yield. Really specific. So this is the targeted outcome, and then the rest of the project basically describes how you're going to get there. It tells you the who acted, who it is you're targeting, what's the action, the specific action that you're measuring, what you're going to do, and then why. So this whole project was focused in on biocontrol to reduce pesticide use, and this is how we were going to know we were successful.
So I'm just going to jump in here. I do see a question from Jen S. about Bloom's taxonomy. There is a list of Bloom's taxonomy or some of those action verbs to help maybe write a logic model or an outcome statement, and it is on the staff site. It's in program development coursework, so PDC 101, which is all about program planning.
Is this a CCE internal set of acronyms?
Yeah, right. I know. I'm sorry. It's awful. I don't know what else to do though. Yeah, we can follow up with everybody with send you the link to that. But the list of action verbs from Bloom's taxonomy.
That's cool.
Is up there, and I find there's actually a Bloom's taxonomy app that I have on my phone, so it really helps as you're trying to describe action words that are related to skills and knowledge gain or behavior change or social change. So great, throw that in there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can anyone access that list?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone
who's staff. Well,
anyone in staff, right?
Yeah, with a yes.
All right.
We'll send that link.
So I think here's an example of where engaging your target audience is really strengthens the proposal, is in writing this outcome statement. Like, how would we know that this mattered and made a difference? The practitioners are often really crisp and clear. Well, you need at least these 10 people to do this. Oh, okay. It helps sort of focus the work. So then the milestones then are the ways that you describe how you're going to get to that targeted outcome or that performance target. That's the words. Those words are a little interchangeable, but the performance target has a really specific structure that I just described. But your milestones are kind of it's like laying out your methods, but slightly with different words than what are typical. Example, if you knew that you were going to do if your project was focused on an educational program where you're going to do some workshops. And so this is an example of a series of learning milestones. Farmers will know that yields can be reduced by 4 insects in high tunnels. Farmers will believe that biocontrol can minimize crop loss. Farmers will be able to choose the right insect biocontrols, and farmers will intend to use that within 6 months of the training. So these are example statements that help you write milestones. The milestones are really helping tell the grant funding agency, how you're going to do this work in a really clear and concise way. And it also helps you think about really critically, how are you going to actually execute? If you're trying to get 10 people to achieve a change by X amount of time, well, you're going to have to start by reaching out to 50. Because the reality is, not everyone you talk to is going to change. So it makes you back your thinking up, starting with the end in mind, right? So you're going to have to think about how many people you're going to teach. You're going to have to think about what you emphasize. If you're really talking about pesticide reduction and biocontrol, you emphasize that, not plastics on high tunnels, unless there's some reason to talk about it. You think about, it'll make you think about how often do you have to meet with the clients or your target audience so that you can assure that they're making progress in their knowledge and understanding to achieve the outcome. How long is it going to take? How many people have to participate? What kinds of hands-on activity are really effective at getting people to shift their thinking? So these are just ways that the milestones not only help you think about your planning, but they help the funders understand how you're going to do what you're going to do. And I actually think they help they can help the whole project team stay focused. Because once you've agreed on the steps, everyone sort of has a more clear sense of what their role is in that. So I think that, I'm trying to remember where I was going, but again, we've gone through a little bit around these different sections of grant proposals, and the outcomes funding has all of these same sections in it, but it will just still ask you for the language that is slightly different, which is the idea of this performance target, the end goal, the outcome that you're working towards, and then the actions that are going to get you there. I'm just going to back up for a second, because one of the challenges, for example, with SARE or some agencies, and there's many of you who have done outcomes-based funding, is that when you write the milestone, you don't write it and by saying, I am going to deliver 4 workshops. You actually write them as action statements, again, for the target audience. So if your goal is 10 farmers change X practice, then your first milestone is 3,000 farmers learn about the opportunity to improve management through our outreach. Then your next milestone would be 150 of them, farmers sign up to participate in workshops. And then you have the upside down funnel. So think about how the way that you interact with people and the way they get drawn into your programs starts with a really large, broad brush, and slowly you channel people into your program with specific actions. And you'll know that you've made that milestone when you actually can say, yeah, 3,000 people did hear about the program. Check. So it helps you with a little bit of management, project management, and governance. So I think that it's actually an interesting exercise and a good tool for project planning to think about the organization using this funding strategy, the outcomes-based model. And it plays out through all of this. It ends up helping you tie your budget back to, okay, if we have to do outreach, our budget needs to have an outreach component to it. What are we going to build in for that? If we have to do on-farm trials, we need travel. Our budget will have that number for trial, and it will say that 10 farmers do on-farm trials. Okay, well, we have to get there to do this. So it makes it really easy to justify the budget. It makes it very easy to tie it together and put a little bow on this nice package. So I would really encourage you to look into it. There's good resources on the Northeast SARE website for outcomes-based funding, and I think Farm Viability also has some books and some materials on their website for their approach. So again, we're back to that damn logic model where we start with the end in mind. What was done, why was it done, who was doing it, who participated and benefited, and what were the measurable results. Bonnie Collins says, this can be used with everything.
That's true.
Yep. Including how am I going to make dinner tonight?
You've done that, haven't you?
So, I think that, you know, I like the idea of starting with the end in mind, and it is that bit of sort of strategic thinking and strategic planning that we're all always doing. We have limited hours, limited time, limited dollars, limited energy. So if we know what's really we feel passionate around, I think this process helps you refine that passion and sell that idea with the passion that you have to others. So I'm hoping that in using your logic model, you can more clearly, in using some of these concepts, more clearly describe and think about the process that you're going to need to actually lay out a viable plan. The way you ask questions of your clients is going to change. So you identify their needs and how you prioritize their needs. Who has to be a partner might change. And so I think it's nice to be able to give yourself the time and space to think more broadly about how to get these kinds of larger projects done. So I am going to share with you a couple of resources. I know you've all seen these, and I know you've done this logic model. I'm not going to spend much time on it. There's a whole lot of evaluation stuff within, I think, CCE as well. And
there's a whole course right around logic models.
There's a whole course on logic models.
There is. It's available, but it's not as having somebody walk through how they're actually useful is probably more useful than a course on logic models. So,
well, I'm not promising.
Keep selling it.
I'm not gonna promise that you'll feel like it's useful after this, but I think that's right. I think that. The idea of being able to sort of, again, a proposal is basically you're taking a logic model and sharing it with the public with text, where you have linked a set of investments to an outcome. And the logic model tells you how you're going to do that. Why should you get $100 grand to do this project? Well, you're going to link with this money, we'll do these trainings, which will result in this change, which will then contribute to the world at large and make it a better place for us all. So it clarifies your links between investments, activities, outputs, and expected outcomes at different time scales. Depends on the model you use. It can communicate about the rationale in a very succinct and nice way. It helps test whether or not something makes sense from a logical perspective. And the words you use on a logic model, again, I think the fewer the better. Really action words, those Bloom's list.
Taxonomy list,
right? Yes, use your action words, be very clear, and then helps you actually then think about your framework for your evaluation. What would success look like? So this is the generic one that USDA uses and requires in a lot of their proposals, NEPA. You can get this on their website. There's all different ways of making the arrows and connecting the boxes. I think the ones that people often don't pay much attention to that I think are really important are the two bottom ones, assumptions and external factors. I think it's important to be clear in writing your proposals what your assumptions are, and if you state them, then your reviewer won't have to say, well, what about X? Well, if you put it in there like, oh, well, they've already thought about X. So that's an important piece, and then the other one is external factors. What other things could happen? This is often in proposals, there's a section that's about sort of contingencies, or like what if what could go wrong, or what are the challenges, and this is where you can describe, well, all of this is dependent on people having internet access, and we know that for X% of our population, rural broadband is a problem. Like that, stating that right up front. We work with the Plain community, and so we have to host meetings in person. We can't use electronic media. Stating these kinds of things makes it really clear to the funder that you know who you are working with, and you know what other things affect your success. But otherwise, I think all of you have probably had to use this in describing your own and justifying your own self to your own internal folks about what you're doing, what your challenge is, your situation, what your inputs are, what you have to work with, what the activities are that you are planning to do, what's that going to turn into, like what's going to be the output. You know, people confuse inputs and outputs and activities. It's really the things that we do, the workshops and everything are just activities. The outputs are the things that are your milestones, basically. How do you know when you've successful? Well, you know, we published a scientific paper summarizing this. One paper produced, 1,000 participants reached. And then in the grand scheme, the longer term, your performance target could be knowledge, actions, or change in conditions. We usually know that we can do knowledge in the short term, so we tend to look at knowledge as the short-term change, then changing in behavior is the longer-term change. But changing in conditions is when, like, you know, a local food system is substituting for imports, that there's actually a much bigger change that's been supported. You don't get to the big condition changes with most of our grants. They end up being something that's like the long-term view, the 10-year mission. So sometimes we can do that, but not always. So just keep in mind that there is a bit of a time frame that's embedded in the outcome. I actually just got introduced, and I put this on the site. It's a newer template that came out of the SARE professional development part. And what I loved about it is it's actually, I split it in half here. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit it so you could actually read what these headings are. I had to split it in half, so this is the left half, and then this is the other half of it with an overlap in the middle. But it basically is like a cheat sheet. I wish I had this as a wall chart where I could write a project idea down and then describe all of these pieces, because it sort of makes you, it forces you to say, who is the beneficiary and how are you going to reach them? What are your learning outcomes? What are the educational activities that you're planning and why? And then you can detail that with your milestones, which in a proposal turns into your method statement. How are you going to know you actually achieved your learning outcomes? And then it just basically goes into, it just provides, again, another template to do project planning. So, and it's an 11 by 17 sheet, and it's a snapshot of a project. And you will find it's so easy to say everything you really need to say on one page. All the rest of it is fluff. All of it, the rest of it is like the ands, buts, or ifs, right? And the way you put your logic together presenting an argument. But you can start, this is another way to do your planning, to really start with this. And so I put it on the site because we just submit, and there's an example proposal that's there for it's a fake proposal. It's around poultry science training for ag service providers, but it gives you a sense of how it was used. And this language that you put onto this chart can then be the basis of a larger proposal. I also did edit a guide that goes with it, a template, and it's up there. And again, this is the guide where I just cut and paste freely from something I'd gotten from SARE, and I tried to take the word farmer out and substitute beneficiary or stakeholder or client. But so please read that with the knowledge that it applies generically, even though the terms are focused on service providers and farmers. Okay, so I think kind of moving towards close to the end here of this talk, the discussion around the planning and the evaluation, I think we often don't really plan for evaluation very well. And someone once told me, okay, the caveat, this was a professional evaluator, but that 10% of your budget should be spent on evaluation. And as time has gone on, I actually think that's pretty true. I think that we undersell ourselves as really being able to collect the information we need to demonstrate our impact. So I would encourage you to think hard about that, building in funding for evaluation. And actually finding someone else to do it. It's so hard to do that on top of everything. Use the resources you have. And often there's an evaluation section, and I can tell you in review panels, if this section isn't written well, they don't want to pay. They don't want to fund you. If you don't know what you're going to do or how you're going to do it, or if you use like boring generic stuff, you know, we're going to do a post-conference survey. So that's really not the evaluation they're asking you for. How are you going to know this proposal changed people? So just doing a post-conference survey is not enough. So that's just my quick comments on evaluation. And then for budgets, building a budget's really hard. Start early and start working with your internal resources early. Certainly here at Cornell, we can't submit a budget any closer than a week to when it's due. Like our office's sponsored programs needs at least a week. I tend to start working as soon as I decide to do a project, I ask for help. So as soon as I think, okay, we're going to make this happen, that's the time you involve someone to help you build a budget. There's templates internally. I think CCE has budget building templates that you all use. Do you? I see them looking at each other like maybe not, but there are some nice ones available, and if anyone wants, I can share some that I use. And it's really just a way to kind of get it all into one place, and then it can be transferred into any sort of budget framework that the grant would require.
I think, again, the form codes in the 1600 range have some of that.
Okay, there you go. There is the mystery language, the form code. So, justify to excess. You never have page limits on budget justification, almost never. So, actually, some people use the budget justification to write what they couldn't fit into the narrative. Just a hint, just a little. There's never often. There's no you can put stuff in there like, oh, we're going to use this trailer to facilitate the moving of equipment for the on-farm studies. But you never said anything in there. As long as you said on-farm studies in the proposal, you can do on-farm studies and then say more about how you're going to do the on-farm study in the justification. And that won't ding you necessarily because people understand that sometimes more detail is needed to justify a budget than necessarily needed for the flow of a proposal. Make sure you build in enough time for personnel. Collaboration takes time. When I work with nonprofits, I make the executive director put in their salary. Because the time you spend on the phone, just quarterly conference calls adds up. And then the time to manage a budget adds up. So think really clearly about and carefully about what that is. Some people have found that for travel, using a fleet vehicle is not the most inexpensive way to go, that getting a rental car is cheaper. So consider that when you start to plan your budget. And again, this whole thing about indirect costs, get approval before you start applying, if you can. So I am going to, if there's any questions, please go ahead and put them in the box, in the chat box. We just did some detail. I'm going to be transitioning a little bit now to sort of building collaborations with the last little time that we have. Are y'all awake out there? I hope that this has been helpful so far. I really do, because I know that every one of us is challenged with being able to fund our good work. So I'm going to move on, and if you have questions, go ahead and start popping them into the chat box. What we're going to do, and I've shared this before at various new staff orientations, but I think a lot about collaboration, and I'm right now at the beginning of a fairly large endeavor here in the college, but that's deeply tied to extension. And what's really important is that I am trying to go really slow in building collaborations and building relationships. So I think that the best collaborators are friends first. And you need to develop a personal relationship with individuals you're going to ask for things from. Nobody likes to be asked for anything from a stranger. So to take the time and meet people face to face, to attend campus or annual meetings, really understand your own skill set and be able to clearly articulate, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. Please, definitely think about that and when you interact with folks that you want for future collaborators. Because everybody does want to be able to contribute in a meaningful way. We see a comment.
So one of the comments said asking for recommendations for budget templates. So is there a place on the web that you might suggest that people go, or maybe we can use a link out to?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a few, I think internally there have been some in the past that I've worked with when I was working with some folks within CCE that had templates. Every single grant proposal will give you a budget template, and so you should look at that first and build an Excel spreadsheet on it. But the important thing is to get the numbers right early on in doing that. And those numbers are the indirect cost rate, your fringe rate, and any other fees. You have to build that in right away at the beginning. And what becomes a real killer is when you're down to the wire and say you are allowed to put in for $10,000 and suddenly you're at $10,042. That's so annoying. So make sure you have those fees and all the costs that all the things you're not allowed to spend for built into it first. So you're always on track, making sure your budget is actually including those sort of invisible costs. I can share, and I'll share them with Kim, and we'll put them on there, a few of the templates I have. I have one that's a STAIR template that's really nice, and it really is just an annual budgeting tool, but it helps you make sure you think about categories of expenses. So back to the building collaborations, build the relationships first, and I think you have to be cognizant if you're going to work with people on campus. For example, if you have a project idea and you want to do it, you're going to have to give that person a minimum 3 weeks heads up, because if there's a budget coming to someone on campus, they're all affected by this minimum 1 week time period. Otherwise, they cannot get a budget approved. So you have to be planning in advance. I also think it's really important, and I say to invest time without funding to ensure funding over time. And so your job, and all of our jobs, is to do the hard preliminary work of collecting the data we need, making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row around trying to get the funding. To be having collaborators that are in your target audience, this is doing the backgrounding work. You and the county have such an advantage to being able to do that, to get really personal relationships and build advocates. You bring a gift to a campus faculty member when you bring people, when you bring real relationships of people who are committed to these ideas. And so that is some of your background work, is you develop that team of stakeholders, the groups of individuals that are really passionate about this idea with you. And then to secure campus support from faculty if you should need it will be so much easier. Don't drop out because it failed. Just remember that you'll probably fail more times than you succeed. It's just part of the course. It's so competitive. You just have to keep putting yourself in there, but take the comments that you get back and improve the proposal for the next time. And don't be afraid to keep going back to an organization, even if they say no. Actually, and sometimes by the third time around, if you go back, they're like, we have to give this person money or they're not going to stop coming here. So definitely keep at it. Establish good communication habits where you're keeping in touch with people, and then ask the tough questions early. Budget. What do you need to get out of this to stay committed to this work? So I think another part that's tricky, and we can't do this, I certainly can't always do this, is starting early with developing proposals. We're all on such crazy timelines. So one, if the RFA comes out and you have a 2-month deadline, even to just send out a, wow, should we do this? Should we pursue this? As soon as you see that, puts it on people's radar. But I actually think if you have an idea for a fairly large grant, you need to start well in advance of that. In some cases, about a year before, especially if you have not led something like this before. You think about your strengths, think about what you bring to the process, and then take the time to develop the relationships. You can try sometimes to rush through a grant proposal, but almost always it fails. And I think it shows up in the quality of the writing in the proposal. So I think it's important to take it slow sometimes, especially if it's a large amount of money.
So Anu, what I'm hearing you say is that sometimes you don't need an RFA to develop the relationships and the project's ideas. So developing that proposal is something you can do it anytime. You're just doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's this whole idea, you're building an area of work, you have an area of expertise, and you think about what has to advance it. And once you know what possible funding agencies you have to work with, you don't have to wait for the RFA to come out. And for some of us, there's certain times of the year where it's easier to sit down and do that kind of writing. It's a discipline. Commit to writing portions of the early drafts. This is really critical if you're working with campus colleagues, is do your part in doing the writing. And so even to submit those early, like, oh, we should do this. Here's my ideas. I'll write them up. I'll get them to you. 2 pages of an extension outreach plan. Oh, my God, that's fabulous. Just do it. So, and then when you're doing a budget for collaboration, I say 10 hours per quarter. And that's just to be able to have conference calls and do the emailing and the other kinds of reporting that have to happen. But that's a low ball budget. You have to think about that based on your engagement. Being a good collaborator is such a part of this, and that is sort of being explicit about X by Y. Like I say X by Y, what you're going to do by when. You know, who's going to do what by when, X by Y by Z. And then do it. Responding to inquiries, particularly when it comes to grant writing deadlines, that's the point when whoever's the lead is in a total panic. And as someone who's been in that position, when someone's like, when you know the deadline's approaching, just stay on alert. Flag that person. Know that they're reaching out and sometimes desperately at the last minute. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to answer this question. So being prompt with those sorts of inquiries is really helpful to building trust. The evaluation and other information, any data you have collected in backgrounding is helpful. So I really do, again, like just because a proposal is coming up and you think, oh, this is great, we should do this, but we don't really have our ducks in a row, you can wear yourself out doing that now, or you can start thinking ahead and planning to do it the next time. Just be in touch with the program manager and ask them, will this come out again next year? You don't want to miss an opportunity, but you also don't want to kill yourself and your collaborators trying to do something too quickly. So I think that is kind of some of everything I wanted to share. What I'm going to do, I know there's a few questions. I'm just going to, let me see here. What's the first one?
I think if you start at Robin Simmons to all participants.
Okay.
CCC or Cornell regularly publish information about relevant RFAs or RFPs as they become public.
Yes, I think that the Office of Sponsored Programs sends out regular announcements as soon as programs are available. And I know certainly we send out grant opportunities. If you're not part of the Small Farm Program Update, you can sign up for that. We send up, every 2 weeks we send out announcements that include those, the ones that are relevant. But that's definitely, if you aren't all getting that announcement, there should be a way that you can. And so I'm looking at Celeste to figure it out.
The best.
So follow up with Celeste.
What I have seen so far, you know, what I've seen, I haven't seen anything out of the Office of Sponsored Programs in particular. Have you?
No, I don't receive that either.
You know, so Lisa Warner sends it out anytime there's a grant deadline that's emerging or new. Like I get the Gates Foundation or Walmart or different companies are soliciting. Sometimes they're for really basic research and they're not relevant. And on some of the NIH proposals, I don't even know what they're asking for. But there are some good places.
So Chris Watkins sends to executive directors on a regular basis.
Yes, and so that's the other problem. Your ED may be the keeper of this knowledge and you're not seeing it. So it may be an internal conversation to make sure those are shared with all of you folks who may be working on the front line in a particular area.
Well, and there's also some very particular funders based on a topical area, right? So if you're involved in a program work team, the chair of your program work team may be sending out funding opportunities. I've seen some of those come through. So staying connected with other people that have the same interest, particularly in the program work team or topical program areas, is probably important. But if I'll look and see if there's something. It looks like Office of Sponsored Programs, most of their what I'm seeing here is focused on research and some of the really big dollars.
But they certainly have promote SARE. They do the participant grants. They do all of them. It just depends on what comes in. So if they're one source. You are all connected to local foundations and other community organizations, so I think finding out where and how those are posted and tracking on that and sharing it with each other is important.
We actually have an excellent webinar recorded that Jim Morris-Knower from Mann Library has offered, and it's on our can take you to our staff site if you want to see that. Through Mann Library, through the library system, all association staff can get into this introductory to foundation directory online, and able to do that at no cost because the Cornell pays for that. And you can specify where your area is, where the funders fund, geographic locations, also subject matter. You can see where other CCA associations have been funded.
That's awesome. What a great resource. I didn't even know about that. That's really great. Let's see. Sometimes a logic model or letters of support are not asked for, but if you have them, should you include them anyhow? That's a tricky one, Jen. I think you should talk to the program manager about that question if you can't tell. Sometimes I've had this problem with some proposals where you have to, if you have a subcontract on your grant, so you have someone who's a collaborator and you're going to give them some of the money to do a particular bit of work. When they submit that subcontract, they need to include a letter of commitment. And there is an attachment place often, or there's a place they ask you to put the letters of commitment. And so I have sometimes put letters of support in with those letters of commitment. So especially when, like, I had a grant that went out and I got a letter from some senators in New York State. And they weren't asked for, but I put them in there. I did not want to not put them in there, and so I put them in where the letters of commitment were. Okay. But I don't go overboard. Do only the strong ones and make sure they're different. If every letter looks the same, reviewers will notice it. We look. Yeah. Because, you know, it's a personal relationship needs to come through in the letter.
We've got about 5 minutes and a few other questions here. So,
oh, I didn't answer the question then about the logic model. I don't know that you have to include it, but you want to make sure that there's some way that you confer the depth of planning you've done. And so if they don't ask for a logic model, probably would scare them by including it. So, but make sure that in your language it's really clear that, you know, these are the steps towards success in the approach.
Or sneak them in if they sort of fit.
Yep.
That's another good way to put it, Jen.
Yep. Let's see. I comment on the value of the New York State Grants Gateway. I actually don't know what that is. I'm not sure what the Grants Gateway is. Do any of you know what it is?
So that's a portal of some kind that each association signs up for in order to apply for.
Oh, is this for the consolidated grant applications? Oh,
so.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get wrapped into that this year, so I'll have more comments on that next year. But how about others in the audience? Does anyone have anything to share about working with the New York State Grants Gateway and the value of being part of, enrolled in that? I'm not seeing any action on that. So I guess, Doug, why don't you tell us what you think? You should enroll prior to having a grant go through them, okay? So that may be a next step, even if you have no intention of applying, is to get yourself signed up. The other thing to do is if you imagine signing up or trying to get money from a foundation in the future, if you sign up for their mailing list, you will get the announcements. So, and you will also be, it's really important to look at what they funded in the past, because that's going to tell you more about their scope. And so doing that background work well in advance of when you think you might apply would be really helpful. There are some databases at USDA that you can search that give project summaries. It's the REPORT, R-E-E-P-O-R-T. I think there's this whole portal to past funded projects and current projects. So if you're going for a large chunk of change through a USDA project, you definitely have to review the projects that have been funded in the past. They expect you to account for why your approach is different. And foundation annual reports are helpful also. So if you have local foundations that are funding projects in your area, that's a part of your work, is to sort of know who is on the playing field.
So in the foundations directory that Kim was mentioning before has access to all of that historical data and kind of demographics that particular foundations prefer to fund, and any of those details.
Great. So this is actually the course page that Anu was talking about. We sent this link to everybody who is registered, at least as of today. And these are some of the templates that Anu has shared with us. There's a past recording, but hopefully this one all worked out. We can put up the newest one, and the slide handout is there also. Another resource, and this is on the staff site under Organizational Development and Accountability. Another resource is if you look under Tools and Support and under Grant Writing and Management, you'll see, again, the link to Being Strategic with Grant Writing takes you back to that course page. And right under that is Introduction to Foundation Directory Online. There's also Contract Risk Management. Do you think about any grants? And these are some of Doug Verver's questions, because he's been in the thick of it, thinking about contracts and what fits in with the mission of Cornell Cooperative Extension, some of those other form code things that.
And that visual on the top of that very page is a good visual in thinking about that contract review process and the steps that you might have to go through for any funding that you're seeking.
It's above and beyond all the writing management.
So building time into that is pretty important.
I'm going to click on the Introduction to Foundation Online Directory, hope that this works. And these are some of those links. So somebody was asking about links too. If you go through this link, this actually connects, it recognizes you as part of Cornell University. You don't get charged to be part of this Foundation Online Directory. And Jim Morris Knower, again, is a resource. You can also contact me and I can make sure you get connected that way. So this is, there is a recording, that one might be an hour long, how to step through that if you want guidelines. So,
great.
And we regularly invite Jim back. Absolutely.
Great. And so I think I wanted to know from all of you if you could put into the chat box what might be some other ways that there's a couple of polls that I have. One is that I would like to know from you if you feel like you've gotten something out of this, and then in the chat box, if you want more detail on any particular section, please write ways in which we collectively can be more supportive of your grant writing efforts.
So that poll should be open now. Improved understanding. How have you improved your understanding of grant proposal concepts?
So I am sharing this just so I can get a sense if this has been helpful to you, and also just as a reminder again, please do, if you have concrete or specific ideas how can CCE or others of us who work really closely be helping you in your grant writing efforts? So can we keep that open, and I'm just gonna scroll ahead while people are responding to that.
Maybe. Try that.
Okay. And so this is, again, this question to write into the chat window, because if we can collect these ideas, then they will help think about future programming and other sorts of webinars or other individuals you might want to involve in this conversation. And I think that's pretty much it. So please do write that into the chat box. And I am looking at, these are just some of the ideas that have come up from other folks that can be helpful. I thought it was really interesting to have some boilerplate on Cornell and cooperative extension impacts. And I don't know if we have anything like that, but it's one of those short statements as to why Cornell or why cooperative extension. Do we have that?
We actually have something that I use internally based on the annual report, our plan of work and reporting that everyone's going through right now. So at the end of the year, I kind of pull together all those summary numbers of, you know, just like you were talking about, I knew the types of information that, you know, that a funder might be interested in, like how are you going to reach out and encourage new people to be interested in your program, who's going to come, who do you want to come to the table, who does come to the table, and what kind of impacts you make. So we have data on the other end of that. So after a year's worth of programs, you know, here's some general, here's our plan of work areas that we work in within cooperative extension. How are we reaching out? You know, what are the broad numbers, and how are we getting reaching people with just general information, like through media and marketing? Who's coming to the table? What kind of programs are we offering, and what kind of impacts are we making? So we do have programmatic data like that broadly, and it, if as needed, can be, you know, the specific numbers could be teased out. But we haven't made that available to everybody across the system because it's used more of as an internal piece. But I think it could be very beneficial.
I think that's pretty interesting because the boilerplate part is pretty important. A lot of times in grant proposals, they'll ask for a management plan, and they want you to speak to why is this the lead organization best positioned to lead this work. That's when boilerplate's really helpful, when you can have short, descriptive, impactful statements about the work that's been done. And so having that sometimes based upon the county program is important, and other times it'll be based upon cooperative extension as a whole.
Yeah, I often point people to our statewide plan of work for that very reason, like, you know, just so that you can indicate to a grant or a funder that, you know, this is an initiative that's important not just to our county or to our region, but on a statewide level, and here's the kinds of things that are happening across the state. So, so that information is available.
So I see a couple of suggestions that have come in. Oh, Julie said the poll's only allowing us to select one answer. Sorry, it was kind of a setup. It was just a setup problem. So, but if you have any comments, I see a few suggestions for future training: a writing class using logic models for outcome-based funding. Let's see. Some comments that I think my evaluation sections have been weak, so I think that that's actually a really important area of this because it really says that you know what you're doing. And it's a funny way, but it's like it really does say you know what you're doing when you have a good evaluation plan. I like Julie Kicker suggested taking a proposal that was written, funded or not, and pick it apart as a group. I think that would be really interesting and perhaps something we could do at as a sort of peer support process at in-service or some other place where we can all bring forward one that we thought was great, and then like it wasn't funded, so help us understand why. Yeah, sometimes it's really frustrating, I'll just say, as a person who writes a lot of grants, that you get comments back and you think, God, they just didn't get it at all. And so then you wonder who's the one to blame, right? And I want to blame the reviewers, doggone it, if they just read it twice. But sometimes you just don't know who's going to be reading the proposal. And at the same time, having some proposals that were successful and well ranked and sort of understanding why those work. It's an art, I would say. You never know. I had a proposal that was funded last year that I really didn't think was going to get funded. And so partly it's who's in the room, who's reviewing, and who you get assigned as a lead. These are really things you don't have any control over. And so the best you can do is really try to make it as easy for anyone to understand and do your work in advance. I think some examples of successful past proposals, that's a great idea to have a way that we can share, proposal structures that worked. So that's something that, I don't know if we can set up something on campus for that through these templates as examples of successful proposals. Sure. I got FOIA'd a few years ago, and it was a real shock. So Freedom of Information Act allowed somebody to ask USDA to see one of my funded proposals. Wow. And it actually brought up a lot of really weird feelings for me because there was sort of a lot of intellectual property that was there in the proposal, and in some cases there's individuals who are participating that have put forth really unique ideas that they're trying to do the research and get publications for tenure and promotion. So it becomes a complicated question depending on who you ask to share a proposal, so be sensitive to that. I think
that's why we haven't done that in the past.
And so sometimes it just depends on the project and the who and your relationships. I certainly shared a bunch of my proposals with people I know that are trying to, and they need models to work from. And I've read other people's proposals to help me think about how to frame something. And I think learning how to frame is what you get out of this. That's a really important piece. I think that's it. But please do continue to communicate about any of these ways in which CCE can be more supportive of you.
Okay. I just see one other question there, part of the evaluation. Right? Is there a system in place to be able to know if CCE counties or groups are going after the same pools of money, collaborate rather than compete? I think when we think about associates, I think of executive directors sharing what's happening from one association to another.
That is so important. I have worked a lot with
the business network.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with the one particular program that many of you, I think, have maybe applied to, the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, or New York Farm Viability. So those are two groups that I've worked with a lot. And if you have questions or comments, I can help you with those specific ones in Northeast there. But I think it is hard because it's sort of hard to know how far to reach, but it's really important. You're stronger together,
Absolutely.
Especially for larger grants. And there's going to be the unavoidable competition that's going to happen. But for example, the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, they have, you should look at the map of where funded projects are, and you'll see it's very heavily biased to the Northeast. We have a lot of strong programs. So the review panel is instructed to fund outside of the Northeast. And you need to know that. Why put in all that work if you suddenly already know you're going to be judged because of your location? So having a sense of what are the currently active proposals is important, and then knowing that there may be a ding against you for being in the Northeast, how do you pitch?
Sure.
Because you have to make it like why they have to fund you, despite having another 10 projects in New York.
Right.
So
not an easy topic at all, but all kinds of wonderful tips, and I think a great guide for all of you who are out there looking for grants. we really appreciate your time today, Anu,
Sure.
and your support, your continued support. We do appreciate that you come back and talk to us every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always there for a question or a suggestion.
I am happy to review. Just have to give me enough notice.
All right. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Good.
I've been doing that for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So thank you all who have joined the webinar. We did record, so we'll hope to get this up on the website, on the course page again. And we'll follow up with an email. We've got a list of promises here so we can be sure you are connected with all the resources. So lots of thank yous out there, and
Take care, everybody. Happy holidays. Eat lots, get fat. Make your pants too tight.
Sounds good.